Hello, fellow Cyclone fans. Fifth graders. It's Mr. Anderson. Gosh, I miss you guys. This is really a tough way to go through your last year with us at Orange City Elementary. I know. Missing everybody, missing all our friends. So hopefully we can come back for, even if it's just for the last few weeks of school. That would be great. But one thing I wanted to make sure I did is I wanted to make sure that we finished this book. It does have such a great lesson in it. It's The Graduation of Jake Moon by Barbara Park. And I know we're at different places, so what I decided to do is I'm going to read the entire book from front to finish, beginning to end. You can, if you want to jump ahead to where we left off with your class, you may do that. Or you can just start all over. It's been so long, I didn't think you'd mind if I read the whole book, and then you can decide. I'm going to split this video into 2 parts because it is quite long. So this is part 1, and then be looking for part 2 in the near future. Hey, love you guys. I hope you're all doing well and feeling good. And I'm fine. I'm just bored out of my mind. Wish I was at school with you. Bye. The Graduation of Jake Moon, written by Barbara Park. An Ann Swartz book, Athenaeum Books for Young Readers, Publishers, New York. Copyright 2000. Chapter 1. The Twist. Now there are these 3 8th grade boys, just gotten out of school for the day, and they're about to take off in different directions. That's when they notice something going on in the trash dumpster at the other end of the parking lot. Now, they're still pretty far away from it, but they can see an old man sitting on the edge of that thing. His back is facing them, and he's just sort of balancing himself there, staring down into the bottom of the dumpster. Now, the boys, they watch him for a second, and then one of them starts grinning. He cups his hands around his mouth and he shouts, "Hey, don't jump, Pops! You've got everything to live for!" Then one of the other boys yells, "Yeah, plus I heard the food is much better at the dumpster up the street." So after that, both kids totally crack up. And it becomes this contest, sort of, to see who can holler out the funniest insults at the old guy. But the third kid, see, he's just standing there, not saying a word. Instead, his eyes are glued to the old guy almost. Well, it's like he's waiting for a reaction. Only that's the thing, because there is no reaction. Not at first, anyway. At first, the old man never even turns around. So the boys, they begin to think that maybe the guy's deaf or something, which totally takes the fun out of shouting insults. But then, out of the blue, something seems to click in the old man's brain. I mean, even from the back, you can see his head sort of perk up. It's like he gets it now, you know. He suddenly understands that all of this yelling has been directed at him. And so he lowers himself down into the trash bin. And then he turns around, to see who's been talking to him. And, that's pretty much that. The fun is over. Because even from the other end of the parking lot, it's obvious to the boys that there is something really wrong with this old guy. He's just not right in the head. Instead of acting mad or angry, or even insulted, his face actually brightens. And he waves as friendly as anything, and he shouts, "Hello, fellas!" Oh, it is so pathetic, I can't even tell you. The 2 boys shut up after that. I mean, they chuckle a little bit and all, but you can tell they're not exactly busting with pride over making fun of a strange old man. But you see, the third kid, the one who kept quiet, he doesn't have anything to be ashamed about at all because, well, like I said, he didn't do anything. So if you happened to be passing by and you saw this whole thing going on, you'd probably think that the third kid was the good kid, that he was the one with a conscience or some sense of decency or something. Only that's the weird thing about this story. That's the twist, I guess you'd call it, on account of the third kid turned out to be the most shameful of all, because the third kid was me, and the old man in the dumpster, that was my grandfather. Chapter 2. Thor, God of Thunder. My name is Jake Moon. No middle name, and it's not Jacob. It's just Jake, and it's just Moon, and I like it pretty well, which isn't bragging because I had nothing to do with it at all. My grandfather named me. And okay, I know, normally it's the parents who name the kid, but my mother wasn't exactly in a solid frame of mind when I was born. In fact, her thinking was so muddled, she never even told my father that she was going to have a baby. You see, Ma met him her third year in college. They went together for over a year, she said. And then on the anniversary of their first date, he asked her out to dinner. He told her he had something really important to ask her that night. So she was positive he was going to give her an engagement ring. So that afternoon, she went to the bank. She withdrew enough money to get herself an expensive manicure. She told me that she wanted her hands to look Fashion Magazine perfect when he put the ring on her finger. The trouble was, when my father came to pick her up, well, he was just wearing cut-off jeans and a t-shirt. And instead of taking her to a big fancy restaurant, he drove her to Arby's and ordered 2 beef and cheddars. Oh, Ma was still holding out hope, though. She said she almost fainted when they finally finished eating, and he reached for her hand, and then he held it in his hand, real romantic and all, and he asked if he could please date her roommate. Okay, the next day, my mother packed up everything she owned and drove to stay with a friend of hers in Connecticut. 3 weeks after she got there, that's when she found out I was on the way. Now, she didn't tell my grandfather. No, not right away. I mean, my mother has always been the independent type, and she wanted to make sure she could support us before she let anybody know. She made up all sorts of excuses not to go home to visit for all those months. She worked at Denny's right until the week I was born, and 2 weeks after that, she went right back to work again. Now, if I had been a normal baby, it might have turned out okay too, but I was one of those mixed up kinds of babies who cry all night and sleep all day. So after 2 solid weeks of listening to me scream, my mother was a walking bundle of raw nerves. Unfortunately, on her first afternoon back at Denny's, some old woman started chewing her out pretty good because there was a hair in her pie. Okay, it's one of those lessons in life I think we can all learn from. Never, ever complain about a hair in your pie when your waitress is teetering on the brink of insanity. Ma picked up that plate, turned it over onto the woman's head, and said, "Oh, what a coincidence! Now there's a pie in your hair." Well, she was fired before she could even take off her apron. That night, she put me in the car, and the two of us drove 4 hours to Skelly's house in Pennsylvania. That's my grandfather's nickname, by the way, Skelly. His real name is Sherman Kelly Moon. But when he was a kid, he hated that Sherman part. So he started signing his name S. Kelly Moon. And he ended up as Skelly. Anyhow, Ma still hadn't thought of a name for me when we moved into Skelly's. That is, unless you consider the Little Screamer from Heck a proper name. But from the first second he saw me, my grandfather started calling me Jake. So that's what I was christened. And the three of us have lived together in his house ever since. Now, Skelly helped raise me while my mother went back to school. Well, he doesn't remember any of this now. Not even my name. But I'll always be grateful to him for calling me something normal. It's important to have a name that you like, I think, especially when you're a kid. Life is tough enough for a kid without having to stand up at your desk on the first day of school and announce that your name is Yehudi or Prunella or something. There was this kid in my first grade class named Thorbert Piddler. Oh, even in first grade, we knew this kid's parents had really dumped on him with that one. And he looked exactly like you would expect a Thorbert Piddler to look, too. Skinny, with thin, mousy brown hair, huge glasses. Now, it's just a theory of mine that most people, well, they grow up to look like their name. Like in my opinion, if your name is Brunhilde, you can pretty much forget about ever becoming Miss America. Miss America, well, that's for people named Tara and Heather and Chantel. If your name is Brunhilde, well, you're probably going to drive a cement truck. Now, in the case of Thorbert Piddler, the best he could have hoped for was to maybe be good at chess, I think. But because of my grandfather, Thorbert lucked out. In first grade, Skelly volunteered to be our room mother. I know, it sounds kind of weird. But Skelly, you see, he could bake the most delicious chocolate cupcakes that you ever put in your mouth. And when he brought them to school, well, he let me pass them out. So on cupcake days, well, I was always the most popular kid in the room. As for Thorbert Piddler, Skelly simply refused to call him Thorbert. Instead, whenever he came to our class, he'd call out in his great booming voice, "Where's Thor, God of Thunder?" And then he'd find Thorbert, hoist him up onto his shoulders, and he'd carry him all around the room. Now, my grandfather's a big man, 6'4" almost. So sitting up on his shoulders, well, that could make you feel like you were king of the planet. And if you were also imagining yourself to be Thor, God of Thunder, well, all I'm saying is that the combination of the two experiences could seriously improve a little kid's self-image. Like, in Thor's case, 3 or 4 weeks after Skelly started carrying him around, he stopped crying in class. And by the end of October, well, his hair started coming in thicker. And by mid-November, Thor's voice had gotten loud enough for him to have a speaking role in our class play about the first Thanksgiving. Oh, I still remember how straight and tall he stood on the stage as he loudly declared, "I am a cranberry, Squanto." Skelly, well, he just had that kind of effect on people. He had a way of believing in you. Well, it made you want to believe in yourself. Well, like when I was in second grade, for instance, my main goal in life was to do 3 pull-ups in PE. I wasn't very strong back then, but I was pretty sure 3 pull-ups would be enough to stop the kids from calling me noodle arms when I dangled from the high bar. I swear, though, no matter how hard I pulled and grunted and kicked my legs, I could never lift myself more than an inch or two. It was frustrating as anything. One day, I strained so hard, I wet my pants a little. Well, no one saw, but that night at dinner, I took one look at the noodle casserole on my plate, and I just started to cry. And after a lot of prodding, my mother finally got me to admit the truth. "I was a weakling. I'm a total wuss," I told her. But as Ma reached out to hug me, Skelly, he stood up from the table, took me by the hand, and led me outside to the backyard tree. He pointed to a strong, thin branch, and he lifted me up. "Grab a hold," he told me. "No, Skelly, I can't. I can't do this," I whined. But the second I grabbed the branch, Skelly slipped his hands underneath the bottoms of my shoes. And now with something solid to push against, I automatically began to pull. Skelly urged me on. "Attaboy, Jake, attaboy." Slowly, my chin rose higher and higher until it finally touched the branch. Now, my grandfather, he let out a big whoo. Then he grabbed me and swung me all around in the air. And I mean, even while I was twirling, I knew that I hadn't really done it on my own or anything. But sometimes a shallow little victory is all the victory you need to keep going. Because the next night, well, I wanted to go out there again. And the night after that, too. And then pretty soon, well, working on pull-ups after dinner, it became a routine with Skelly and me. It was just getting dark the night in April when I went up for my 3rd pull-up. And I made it. While I was still hanging in midair, Skelly hugged me so tight a little whoosh of air actually came out of my mouth. "You're really something, Jake Moon," he said in my ear. Yeah, I thought I was going to bust open with pride. Well, it must have been the same way Thor Piddler felt when he belted out that he was a cranberry that Thanksgiving in 1st grade. You see, you don't forget amazing moments in your life like that. And you don't forget the people who helped cheer you on either. Which is why I wasn't surprised at all when in 3rd grade, Thor showed up at our front door to say goodbye to my grandfather. You see, his dad had been transferred out of state, and while Thor was packing for the move, he ran across an old picture of himself sitting on Skelly's shoulders. He wanted Skelly to have it to remember him by. But it was a rainy Saturday in November when he came by. And the reason I know it was November is because it was the same month that Skelly was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Now, you've probably heard of Alzheimer's by now. It's that terrible, incurable brain disease that destroys a person's memory and his ability to think straight or even to have a simple conversation. Back then, though, I mostly just thought that Alzheimer's was a disease that made old people forget where they put their car keys. And since I was already used to Skelly being a little absent-minded, no big deal, I thought. Wrong. Very big deal. After he was diagnosed, Skelly's normally calm personality, well, it turned totally inside out. Ma said it was because he was scared to death about what was happening to him. Now, if he lost his car keys, well, he would storm all around the house, looking under everything in sight, trying to find them. Even things that made no sense. I mean, like inside the microwave oven? Or Ma's ficus plant in the dining room? And then, if he still couldn't find them, well, then he'd blame it on me. "What'd you do with them, Jake? Where'd you put them? From now on, you leave my stuff alone, you hear?" "I didn't take them, Skelly," I'd yell back. "I didn't touch your stupid keys." But nothing I said ever undid his anger, and I'd almost always end up in tears. Well, anyhow, it definitely didn't help matters for Skelly to open the front door that rainy Saturday morning and see Thorbert Piddler standing on the porch. Because I'm telling you right now, he didn't have a clue who that kid was. Not even when Thorbert said he was Thorbert. My mother and we were both standing there when it happened, and I admit we overreacted a little. Ma yanked Thor into the house by his arm, and I started saying his name over and over again, real loud, like if I said it long enough or loud enough, well, it might jog Skelly's memory. "Thorbert! It's Thor! Look, Thorbert Piddler! It's Thorbert!" When it still didn't register in Skelly's face, Ma tried as nice as she could to help him along. "It's Thor, Dad," she said. "You remember Thor, don't you, from first grade? You were room mother back then, remember? This is Thor, God of Thunder." And without any warning, Skelly started to yell. "Lord, you two! You don't need to keep saying his name. I'm not crazy yet, am I? I remember Thor. How could I not remember Thor?" Boy, my face heated up in embarrassment, and I kind of laughed stupidly. Poor Thor. All he wanted to do was get the heck out of there. He shoved the picture into Skelly's hands, and he started backing towards the door. "Yeah, well, I just came to bring you this, Mr. Moon," he said. "I just wanted you to have that picture there, okay? I found it in my closet, and I thought maybe you'd like to have it. But if you don't, that's okay too." As soon as my grandfather looked at the picture, his face softened. It was in a silver picture frame with a blue velvet ribbon tied around it. You could tell that Thor had tied the bow himself. Skelly bent down, put his hand on Thor's shoulder. "We had fun back then, didn't we, son?" he said, and he smiled a little. Then he stood back up and he turned away. Early the next morning, when it was still dark outside, I woke up, because I had to go use the bathroom. And on my way back, I heard a noise coming from the living room. I tiptoed down the hall, and I peeked my head around the corner. Skelly was sitting across the room in his favorite rocking chair. He was just rocking in the dark. As I watched, he stopped rocking, and he clicked on his flashlight. He shined the light at something he was holding on his lap, looked at it a minute, then clicked off the light and he just started rocking again. He did this 4 or 5 times before I finally figured out what was going on. Skelly, he was shining the flashlight on the picture of Thor, trying to remember. I went in, embarrassed. Oh, Skelly quickly pushed everything from his lap onto the floor. "What are you doing up?" he said. But instead of answering, I just walked over to the couch and I grabbed the blanket that was hanging across the back. Then I climbed into his lap and I covered us both with the blanket. I buried my face in his chest. "It's cold in here," I said quietly. Skelly circled his arms around me, held me close as we rocked back and forth. Chapter 3. Behinds and Other Family Matters. That February, I was chosen class Valentine King. You see, in Mr. Gooding's 3rd grade, the Valentine King was the first boy in the room to hand in the Valentine's Day math assignment with no mistakes. The winner got to wear a king's crown at the party and join the Valentine Queen in passing out all the cards from the Valentine box. Well, the Valentine Queen was Lila Lily. Lila was a quiet girl with braces, so I had no reason to expect trouble out of her. But as soon as Mr. Gooding gave her that stupid crown, well, it must have gone right to her head or something, because she knocked me out of the way, dug both arms into the box, and took about 90% of the Valentines for herself. Then, somehow, she held out her skirt and used it as a pouch for the cards, and then she started dashing around the room like she was the delivery queen of the world. Annoyed, I took off after her to discuss the matter. And okay, fine, I admit we had a scuffle. But still, I don't think it was a big enough deal to make me forfeit my crown, plus not get a Valentine cupcake. Well, anyhow, since Mr. Gooding was the kind of teacher who enjoyed calling parents at home at night, I thought it would be smart to tell Ma my side of the story before he squealed on me. And in another smart move, I decided to save my confession for the dinner table, where Ma was less likely to take a swat at me. But I had barely gotten to the part about Lila Lily being Valentine Queen when Skelly interrupted. "Hey, we used to have an old dog named Queenie. You remember Queenie, Mavis?" he said. "Yeah, she had pups in my sleeping bag one time." I frowned at him. "Yeah, great, Scal, but I really need to tell Ma about what happened at school today, okay?" My grandfather paid no attention to me at all. Wait, hold it. I'm wrong. I'm thinking of Heidi." "Yeah, well, whatever," I said, turning back to my mother. "So anyway, when Lila—" "Do you remember Heidi, Mavis?" said Skelly. "She had one brown ear and one white ear. Got her from the pound. And only had 3 legs. Remember her?" I could tell by Ma's face that something wasn't right here, and she didn't correct him, though. Suddenly, Skelly shook his head. No, hold on again. That was my old friend Hiram Wickham, wasn't it?" I raised my eyebrows. What? What was this? Hiram Wickham had 3 legs? I started to ask what he was talking about, but Ma suddenly kicked me under the table. "Yeah, poor old Hiram," said Skelly. had to have two of his dogs amputated. Ran over them with his lawnmower. You remember that, Mavis? It was big dog and little one. Okay, now I was stunned. Hiram had amputated his dogs? Quickly, Ma leaned in my direction and shook her head. Toes, she whispered, so my grandfather couldn't hear. Hiram Wickham ran over two of his toes, not his dogs. That night, after my mother and Skelly left the table, I just sat there contemplating the horrors of Hiram Wickham and how completely mixed up Skelly had gotten. After she finished the dishes, Ma came over and tried to turn up the corners of my mouth with her fingers, but I pushed her hand away. He's getting worse, Ma, I said. Tonight, when he messed up, he didn't even know it. He didn't even catch himself. My mother smoothed my hair. Her silence told me I was right. After she left, I went to the living room. For the rest of the night, I sat across from Skelly's recliner and watched him watch TV. I hardly blinked, hardly even moved. See, maybe if I watched him close enough, he wouldn't have a chance to slip further away. Now, Alzheimer's has 3 stages. Each stage is worse than the one before it. Now, I don't know if any of the stages have official names, but in my head, I think of them as 1, sad, 2, sadder, and 3, the saddest thing you've ever seen. Skelly's doc is a woman named Dr. Bloomfield. She told Ma and me that there is no set time period for how long each stage lasts, and that since not all patients have the same symptoms, you're never sure exactly when a person has passed from one terrible stage to the next terrible stage. The day I started 4th grade, I went to get a can of orange juice, and I found Skelly's pajamas in the freezer. Okay, it might sound funny, but this was the second time he'd put them there instead of in the hamper, so I didn't get a big hearty laugh out of it or anything. A few days later, when I brought my new best friend, Lucas Carney, home from school, there was a little note on the freezer in Skelly's handwriting. It said, "This is not the hamper." Lucas looked at it, and then at me. I tried to laugh it off. That's just some stupid joke between Ma and me, I said. And to distract him, I poured us something to drink. But just as I was handing Lucas his glass, we both noticed a piece of material sticking out the top of the oven door. Lucas opened it. Inside on the top rack were 2 wet sheets. Is this another joke between your mother and you? Or do you guys dry your sheets in your oven? He asked. This time, I started to stammer like you wouldn't believe. Yeah, we do. No, we don't. Okay, here's the thing is, our dryer broke this morning before I left for school. And my ma, she read in our oven book that if you're really in a bind, you can dry wet clothes in the oven. Lucas put his hand inside the door. But it isn't even on. My mind was racing a mile a minute. I know. Of course it's not on. If you turn on the heat, oh my gosh, the sheets would burn to a crisp. The book said the sheets are supposed to dry in their own natural juices. I closed the oven door. I pointed Lucas towards my room. Go pick out a video game, okay? I'll be there in a minute. As soon as he was gone, I looked through the kitchen window and I saw Skelly working in the yard. He was hunched over in the middle of the grass, pulling out weeds, it looked like. I hurried to the back door and I locked it. Then I ran straight to my room and I locked that door too. Skelly was still outside when Ma got home from work that afternoon. Lucas had gone by then, so as soon as I heard her car pull up, I ran out and I tattled on my grandfather like he was a little kid. "You gotta talk to him, Ma! You've got to! He embarrassed me so bad today. He's not even trying. He's just being an idiot." After she heard all the details, my mother said she'd find a way to mention the sheets to him. But at dinner that night, Skelly was in such good spirits, she didn't want to ruin his mood. Halfway through supper, he looked at me and he snapped his fingers. "Oops, almost forgot there, Jakey boy," he said. "Look what I found while I was digging out in the garden today." He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out one of my old Matchbox race cars, rolled it over to me across the table. "This was one of your favorites, wasn't it?" he said. I turned it over in my hand. Oh, it was the red Ferrari with the blazes of fire painted on the sides. He must have been polishing it up all afternoon. He'd even touched up the paint and gotten the rust and the dirt out of the little tire rims. I thanked him. I reached over to give him a hug. But as I did, my mind flashed an ugly instant replay of how I'd locked the back door so he couldn't get in. Oh, I kicked myself around pretty good over that too. But that's just how up and down and unpredictable our lives were back then. Just when you were sure Skelly had gone off the deep end for good, he'd start acting like his regular old self. Almost. Later, I asked Ma not to mention the sheets thing to him, but she told me she already had. And in a little bit of a breakthrough, she said Skelly had seemed willing to post more notes around the house to help him remember things better. The next morning when I got up, there were little post-it sticky notes. They were taped all over the place. Like on the phone receiver, it said, "Take message." And there were larger notes on the appliances, like a "close me" sign on the refrigerator door and a "turn me off" sign on the stovetop. Also, Ma had made Skelly a list of reminders. She pinned it to the bottom of his t-shirt. Things like 1. Turn off hose. 2. Turn off stove burners. 3. Lock front door. And 4. Wash goes in dryer. She pinned the list upside down. That way all he had to do was hold it out his shirt and read it. But as helpful as it was to him, it made me sad as anything seeing that list pinned to him all the time. He looked like some forgetful little kindergartner with a note from his teacher. Now, since my mother is an accountant, she was able to adjust her schedule at work. She could work at home during the morning and not leave for the office until noon. She was home again by 4:30. Meanwhile, an older lady from across the street named Etta Gerber, she looked in on Skelly once or twice until I got home from school at 3:30. Ada came over again at 4 just to "Double check on the moon, men," she used to say. Yeah, she thought that was a hilarious joke, by the way. She acted like she was the first person who had ever thought of it. Well, usually when I got home from school, well, Skelly was either working in the yard or down in his basement workshop. You see, all of his life, my grandfather had been a house painter, but after he retired, he started restoring old furniture and antiques. He was a real craftsman, too. Skelly, he could take some scummy old table that you wouldn't even want to touch, and in a month or two, well, he'd have it looking like brand new. He always let me help him, too, even when I was little and sloppy. If I asked to help, Skelly would stop what he was doing and he would teach me how to do the job right. He never made up some pretend little job for me just so I'd stay out of his hair, like some dads do. And he wasn't afraid to let me mess up either. "Sometimes messing up is the best teacher." That's what he used to say. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking past this house down the street, and there was this little girl who thought she was helping her dad paint the porch steps. But even though her hand was on the brush, her dad's hand was right on top of hers. He was doing the actual painting, so she wouldn't slop it up. And I'm sure the guy meant well and all, but how's the kid ever supposed to learn? When Skelly taught me how to paint, he showed me exactly how far to dip the brush in the can and how to tap it lightly on the edge to shake off the extra so it didn't drip and run. It paid off too. I was the only kid in my kindergarten class who didn't splat paint all over the room on the first day of art. Not one drop anywhere. And I got my first happy face sticker for that. Now, when I think about it, Skelly taught me a ton of stuff in that basement workshop of his. Sometimes he taught me stuff, he wasn't even aware of, I don't think. Like the first time I helped him sand a table. The two of us didn't talk for over 30 minutes, I bet. Just stood there working side by side, listening to the rhythm of the sandpaper as it rubbed back and forth across the wood. Well, even now, I still love the sound of that. We were excellent sanders, Skelly and me. We could sand a piece of wood until it was as smooth as a baby's behind. Now, that was one of his favorite expressions, by the way, smooth as a baby's behind. Except he always pronounced it behind with the accent on the B part, which always made me laugh because it sounded particularly stupid that way. Well, the last project that my grandfather ever worked on down there was a scuzzy old little table my Aunt Marguerite bought at a yard sale. Aunt Marguerite. She is one of those yard sale crazies that you hear about sometimes. Like if you're having a yard sale that starts at 7, she's the one that's pounding on your screen door at 5 in the morning asking you why the stuff isn't in the carport yet. She gets first dibs on all the bargains that way. Well, that's what she says. Totally kills me too, because in her divorce settlement, Aunt Marguerite got so much money. Oh, you can't even count the zeros. Anyhow, well, as soon as she bought it, she brought that scuzzy table straight over to Skelly's for Skelly to refinish for her. And to make things even more unpleasant, she also brought my scuzzy cousin, James. Oh, James. He's a year older than me, and I've never liked him. He treats me like I'm gum on the bottom of his shoe. Well, by the time Skelly and I walked out to see the table, well, James had already unloaded it onto the sidewalk. But even though it was out in the open air, I still had to hold my nose when I got close to it. And I am not kidding. The stink pollution coming from that little table, it was contaminating the entire neighborhood. I could not believe my ears when Aunt Marguerite told James to pick it up and take it to Skelly's workshop. I let go of my nose. No! Jeez! Doesn't anybody notice that pukey smell but me? Come on, Aunt Marguerite. At least let it air out for a while. There are people who have to live in that house. By this time, James had managed to get the table to the bottom of the porch steps. So I ran over. I grabbed the other side of it. Put it down, James. We're not taking it in yet, I said. James, he tried to pull it away. Knock it off, Joke. No, you knock it off, lames, I said back. Then, still holding onto the table, I gave a very hard push. Shoved him backwards. James, of course, tripped over his feet, and the table fell on its side. But that's when my grandfather came rushing over. Oh, there was nothing that annoyed Skelly more than when me and James fought, which was always. Lord save us, you two! Give it here! I'm going to carry it to the basement myself, he snapped. Angrily, he picked it up, hurried up the steps. Aunt Marguerite gave me and James one of her classic looks and told Skelly to be careful. I followed them into the house. When they got to the end of the hall, my grandfather waited while my aunt opened the basement door and flipped on the light switch. I watched as Skelly hoisted the table higher in his arms and headed down. But instead of taking each step slowly, in his anger, he was still going much too fast. Aunt Marguerite shouted for him to slow down. I closed my eyes. He was 4 steps from the bottom when he fell. Chapter 4. Lucky Duck. He broke his wrist. Both of them. But still, there wasn't one person in the emergency room that night who just didn't go on and on about Skelly's wonderful good luck. You're a lucky man, Mr. Moon, said the emergency room doctor. You could have broken your neck in a fall like that. His neck, said the nurse. He's lucky he didn't break his back. The X-ray guy, he was my favorite. He held the pictures of Skelly's 2 shattered wrist bones up to the light, and he said, You know, considering how far you fell, I'd say you got yourself a couple of lucky breaks here. He cracked up at his own stupid joke, and when he looked at me to see if I was laughing too, I wasn't. I mean, excuse me, okay? But for an old man whose biggest joy in life is sanding old furniture, it seems like 2 broken wrists are, well, that's a pretty huge deal. And if the doctor or the nurse or the X-ray guy hadn't been so busy yucking it up, maybe they would have noticed that my grandfather hadn't spoken 2 words to any of them. As we rode home in the car, I sat next to Skelly in the back seat. Every time I looked over at him, he was staring at his cast. He never took his eyes off them, not once. And even days later, long after he should have been used to them, I would walk into the living room and I'd find him sitting in his recliner, watching his cast instead of the TV. Hey, Skel, what's up? I would say. Isn't there something you want to watch on the tube? Then right away, I'd start flipping through the channels, trying to find a baseball game or, something else he might like. But no matter what I picked for him, it wasn't long before his eyes would drop. He'd be right back staring at those casts again. Dr. Bloomfield wasn't surprised by his gloominess. She said it was very common for Alzheimer's patients to get depressed after going through a trauma like his. She even warned us that the disease, it might start getting worse even faster. After a trauma, patients can become so overwhelmed, it's almost like they don't have the energy to keep fighting anymore. That's what she told us. Well, to try to lift his spirits, my mother and my aunt, they took him on picnics on the weekends. Other times, me and Ma would take him to the movies or maybe out for ice cream. But regardless of what we did, the minute Skelly hit the door, he would head straight for his recliner or his bed. Now, to their credit, Ma and Marguerite, they didn't give up. In fact, the week before his cast finally came off, my aunt brought him a burlap sack with a big red ribbon tied around it. Inside were packages of flower seeds, all of Skelly's favorites. She hurried into his room and woke him. "Look, Dad, flower seeds. See them? Pansies, poppies, morning glories. Now, I know it's still too cool to plant them outside, but I bought everything you need to get them started inside. Fluorescent bulbs, potting soil, it's all in the kitchen. You can grow them from seed and then transplant them into your garden as soon as it warms up." She showed him the pictures of the flowers. "Just a few more weeks, and you'll be out there with your trowel digging in the garden, just like always." Skelly's eyes filled with tears. And we thought it was because he was so happy, that his troubles were almost over. But the next day when I got up, I found the bag of flower seeds in the kitchen trash where he dumped them during the night. Ma tried to shrug it off. "Oh, it was just too soon for him to think about all that," she said. "You mark my words, Jake. As soon as those casts come off, he'll be raring to get started." But 1 week later, when the casts did come off, Skelly was more worried about his wrists than ever. At dinner the first night, he wouldn't even carry a plate of spaghetti to the table. He said, "It's too heavy." And at breakfast the next morning, he had both of his wrists wrapped in brown socks? Okay, that was just plain disturbing. That afternoon, I dug out his old baseball glove from his closet. I told him I'd like to have a catch. Just seemed like a good way to ease him back into using his hands again. That's what I thought. "Come on, Skell. It'll be fun," I said. "We'll take it totally easy, I promise." At first, Skelly examined the glove like he was trying to figure out what it was. But when he finally looked up at me from his chair, his expression had turned sour. "Catch! Oh, exactly how am I supposed to play catch?" said the word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. Then he threw the glove on the floor and stood up. The next thing I knew, he was flinging his wrist in my face. "How am I supposed to do anything at all with bones as weak as these, huh? You tell me that, will you? How am I going to do anything ever again?" As he turned and left the room, I heard him mutter, "Catch, for Christ's sake." "Huh? Skelly, Skelly had never sworn around me before. Never once. Not in my whole life. With tears running down my face, I picked up his glove and I took it outside. And I lifted the lid of the trash can and I slammed it straight down to the bottom. Now, 4 months after his accident, I woke Skelly up for dinner one night. He asked me who I was. Now, he said it like a joke almost. I mean, he'd been asleep on his bed, and when I tapped him awake, he said, "Who you?" "Yeah, right. Real funny, Skel. Ma says the pot roast is ready, okay? Can you smell it?" He squinted his eyes, and he had to study my face. That's when I knew he wasn't joking. He didn't have a clue who I was. Now, there's no way to describe how terrible that made me feel inside, except to say that it's never totally gone away. And even though there were still times after that when Skelly knew me perfectly well, it became more and more common for me to walk into his room and have him totally baffled. Over time, Skelly, he finally settled on the idea that I was Claude Harper. That was his best friend from when he was a kid. And now, through the magic of Alzheimer's, his best friend was here once again. After my grandfather's accident, Ma took a leave of absence from work so she could stay with him for a few weeks. And then my Aunt Marguerite stayed with him some too. But eventually, both of them had to go back to work, so they hired a full-time caregiver. A caregiver, that's a person who takes care of sick people. Now, the caregiver does not have to be a nurse, but ours was. Ours was a registered nurse named Lana. And the reason I know she was registered is that it was physically impossible for Lana just to say, "I'm a nurse." She always had to add the registered part. Like anyone even knows what that means. My mother's work schedule had changed again. She'd gotten a promotion. So now, she was needed at the office in the morning too. So for a long time, Lana, she came at 9 and she stayed until Ma got home at 4:30. But by the middle of my 5th grade year, Lana started having problems with her daughter, Vanna. And from then on, she needed to leave our house at 3:30 sharp, she said, so she could go pick Vanna up from school. Ma tried to hire someone to watch Skelly from 3:30 to 4:30, but nobody was interested in that. So finally, I offered just to fill in for a while. Didn't seem like it would be that big of a deal, really, because most of the time, I just came home from school and watched TV anyway, and Skelly was almost always asleep in his recliner. So how much of a pain could it be, I thought. Now, at first, I'll be honest, the answer was none at all. In fact, for the first month or so, it seemed like nothing had even changed. But pretty soon, stuff started coming up after school that I had to miss, and I began to resent it. Didn't help that Skelly's behavior kept getting weirder and weirder either. For one thing, he began roaming around in the middle of the night. Ma installed deadbolt locks and bells on all the outside doors to keep him from wandering away. But none of that stopped him from shuffling from room to room at 3 in the morning, turning on all the lights. Also, he began hoarding stuff from the kitchen. There were nights when I would hear him knocking around in the dark, and when I got up, I'd find him, be carrying cans of soup and vegetables down the hall to his room. He'd line them up all nice and neat on the shelf, just like they were cans in the grocery store. When I asked him why, he said, "Need to have food in there, just in case." Yeah, whatever that meant. Another thing that got worse was Skelly's repeating. One Sunday at family night dinner, he set a new world record by asking James and me if we liked lima beans 11 times. On the 12th time, James passed me an imaginary gun under the table, and we both pretended to shoot ourselves. So far, well, that's been one of our nicest moments that we've shared together. Anyhow, even with all the confusion at home, I was still managing to have, well, a life at school. Lucas Carney was still my best friend in 5th grade. So by then, well, I'd actually told him about Skelly's Alzheimer's. Not all the crazy business, I don't mean, but Lucas definitely knew my grandfather wasn't all there. A couple of times a week, usually, Lucas would come over after school, and we'd shoot hoops in the side yard. We almost always stayed outside while Skelly napped in the living room. But once in a while, well, we'd go into the kitchen, because we wanted a drink of water. And on one of those trips, Skelly woke up and came wandering in to join us. His hair, it was all wild and fuzzy looking, from sleeping in the recliner. And he was only wearing one shoe. As soon as he saw Lucas, he pointed his finger at him and told him to zipper your brisket. I froze in amazement. Meanwhile, Lucas started backing up like a psycho had just entered the room. Finally, I managed to grab Lucas by the arm and steer him out the door. "Jacket," I said as soon as we got outside. He meant to zip up your jacket. It's just that the Alzheimer's keeps erasing words from his vocabulary. And when he can't remember the right name for something, he substitutes something else. Lucas rolled his eyes. "Then why didn't he just tell me to zip up my coat? I mean, my gosh, Moon, a brisket? That's like a big hunk of meat or something, isn't it?" I started getting defensive. "So, what do you want me to do, Lucas? Do you want me to figure out a way for this stupid disease to make sense to you? That's just the way it works, okay?" After that came this awkward kind of silence. Lucas grabbed the ball and started shooting again. "So?" I said finally. "So what?" "So, are you gonna zipper your brisket or not?" Lucas laughed a little, and he zipped up his coat. "There! Now is everyone happy?" Things got back to normal after that. But a couple of weeks later, when Lucas went inside to get another drink, Skelly called him Sylvia. So from that day on, whenever he got thirsty, Lucas Carney, he drank from our outside hose. Now my resentment started to build. I know, it was only an hour a day that I had to stay with Skelly, but there turned out to be a big difference between coming home right after school because I wanted to and coming home right after school because I had to. The trouble was, Ma was all the time praising me like I was a saint or something, telling me how generous I was, giving Skelly an hour of my day. Plus, she was always saying how she would do everything in her power to keep the rest of my life as normal as possible. Cross my heart and hope to die, Jake, she told me one Saturday morning. I'm going to hang on to normal if it kills me. Then, to show me she really meant business, well, she went down to sign me up for Little League an hour before the doors opened. Okay, there were 2 baseball games a week that spring, plus 3 practices. But Ma insisted that getting me there would be no problem. It's just that Skelly would have to come with us now. Who knows, she said. Maybe getting him outside with all the fresh air and all those young ball players might even do him some good. Now, you see, Skelly had always loved baseball. He had played on a senior league until he was 60. Well, I think it was. And we still have the videotape of the time he took me to my first Little League game. It was the same day that I took my first steps, actually. Ma said, she said she's so proud of those 5 steps that I took. He ran me straight down to the ball field where there was a game going on. My mother, who's always had a tendency to over-video my life, ran behind him with the video camera. And as soon as Little League game was over, she filmed Skelly carrying me around the backstop, standing me up right by home plate. I fell down twice. But the third time, I stood there all by myself. Well, for at least 10 seconds, before I started to sway. Then, just as I was about ready to keel over, Skelly came running into the picture, scooped me up in his arms, and zoomed me around the bases for my first home run. Unfortunately, when I played in 5th grade, Ma's wishful thinking about the fresh air being good for Skelly, that didn't prove to be true. In fact, most of the time, as soon as she got him seated on the bleachers at a game, well, he was ready to go home again. Ma kept on bringing him, though. Whenever he got antsy, she would walk him around the track or the school parking lot. And I know it was hard on her, and I know she tried her best. But twice during the season, she got busy talking to someone in the stands. And Skelly, well, of course, he climbed down and he started to walk home by himself. Both times, he took a shortcut right through the infield. In the middle of an inning, the guys on my team started calling him Mr. Magoo, after that old man cartoon character. You know, the guy with the bad eyesight? He's always walking where he shouldn't be walking. I laughed with the kids. You see, you learn to do that by 5th grade. If you don't laugh, they never stop. Now, the last inning of the very last game of the season, for some completely unknown reason, my grandfather stood up in his seat and just started shouting, "Cold beer! Right here! Get your cold beer here!" My team was at bat when it happened. I just walked out of the dugout, walked straight over to the car, never said squat to my coach or my teammates or anybody, just walked to the car and waited for Mom to bring Skelly and drive me home. Thank goodness school got out a week later and I could lay low for a couple of months. Chapter 5. Just Say No. Well, by the time 6th grade rolled around in September, the laying low strategy had turned into total boredom, and I was desperate to get out of the house again. 6th grade started out pretty good for me, too. Like the second week of school, my teacher asked me if I'd run for class treasurer. And a day or two after that, we got this new kid in our class. His name was Aaron Fryer. He was assigned the seat right next to me, which was so lucky I couldn't believe. Because, well, you could just tell by the way Aaron looked and dressed and walked even. He was going to be seriously popular. Now, as soon as he sat down, a plan was already forming in my head. I would hook up with Aaron Fryer while he was still desperate for friends, and then I could shoot straight up the popularity ladder right along with him. Now, the second week he was in school, I got the nerve to invite him to spend the night at my house. Now, it had been more than a year since anyone had slept over at my place. With all the problems going on with my grandfather, I'd hardly even thought about stuff like that, in fact. But even though it was risky having someone in my house with Skelly acting so weird, the opportunity with Aaron was too good to pass up. And besides, if Aaron and I mostly stayed in my room and Skelly mostly slept in his chair, well, there was a decent chance two of them wouldn't even have to meet. I planned out that night like you wouldn't believe. First, in a covert operation at school, I got a hold of the latest teenage slasher movie, which Ma, of course, had refused to let me rent. Then I drilled it into her head that she was not, under any circumstances, allowed to open my door without knocking first. And even then, she had to wait for me to say, "Come in." That way, I would have more than enough time to turn off the movie. So, no problem, right? I also told her that she was not allowed to let Skelly out of her sight, which she already knew, she said. But just to be sure, I kept on mentioning it right up until Aaron's parents dropped him off at my house on Friday. Well, as soon as he knocked on the door that night, I whisked him straight to my room. Then I shut the door, opened up a brand new video game that I had bought with my own allowance. An hour or so later, well, my mother kept her word, kicked at the door about 10 times with her foot before finally carrying in a big bucket of chicken for us to eat in the room. Aaron was having a good time, too. Oh, you could tell that he was. The movie? Ooh, that was only going to make it even better. Or at least that's what I thought. But as the two of us were finishing our chicken, there was another noise at my door. Must be Ma bringing dessert, I figured, so I really didn't pay much attention. But when the door pushed open, it wasn't my mother at all. It was, guess who? Skelly. Skelly had been on his way to the shower and had heard our voices. So he wandered on in and stood right there in the middle of my bedroom. And he wasn't wearing pants. No pants at all, I mean. No long pants. No short pants. No underpants. And Aaron Fryer, he busted out laughing so hard, orange soda came shooting out of his nose. He didn't stop laughing either, not even when Ma ran in apologizing all over the place and rushed Skelly back out the door. Not even when I explained to him about the Alzheimer's, or swore that Skelly had never ever done anything like this before. I begged him not to say anything. Come on, Aaron, please don't tell anybody at school, okay? I mean, what if this was your grandfather? What if he had an incurable brain disease? You wouldn't want people cracking jokes about him, would you? Oh boy, I never should have used the word crack. Aaron busted out laughing all over again. Okay, but now I was actually getting mad. Okay, knock it off, Aaron, and I mean it. How can you laugh at someone who's sick like that? It's only going to get worse, too. He's going to die from it, okay? How can that be funny to you? Aaron stopped laughing then. He was sorry, he said. He hadn't known Skelly was going to die. He got it now, he told me. And he swore. He swore he would never mention what happened to anyone. He swore. On Monday morning, I walked past a group of guys out on the playground. Kid I hardly knew cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Hey, Moon! I hear your grandpa's a perv!" It's been 2.5 years since Aaron Fryer spent the night. No kid has been invited to my house since then. Well, later that month, I decided not to go out run the race for class treasurer. I decided not to go out for cross country. In October, I stayed home from basketball tryouts. By then, Ma was going nuts practically, swearing up and down again that she could still make it all work. But I'm not one of those kids who can brush off humiliation like it's a crumb on my shirt. And the idea that Skelly would be sitting in the stands in my school gym during a basketball game, that just made me crazy almost. No gets easier the more you say it. And as the year went on, I got better and better at making up excuses and turning down invitations. You see, my logic was as simple as my new life. If I didn't go to anyone's house, no one would expect to come over to my house. Takes a while for your friends to stop calling, but they eventually do. The house stays a lot quieter when the phone doesn't ring, which is depressing at first. But if no one calls, well, at least your grandfather can't pick up the phone while he's watching Wheel of Fortune and tell Lucas Carney, "I'd like to buy a vowel." The night that happened, Lucas laughed about it, but I could tell from his voice it had really kind of creeped him out again. And before he hung up, he asked if from now on, if I could answer the phone before Skelly did. It bothered me that he would ask that. But I said I'd try. But trying must not have been good enough, because Lucas didn't call me anymore after that. And so what had started out as a perfectly good school year, it had turned totally rotten by Christmas. Now, just to show you, though, how weird life can be, though on the first day back from winter break, something came up that almost turned everything around. It was almost time for the afternoon bell to ring when my teacher started handing out permission slips for music lessons. Well, as usual, I just began passing the whole stack to the kid behind me. Didn't even bother to take one. But then, out of nowhere, it hit me. Music lessons. The drums! I could take drum lessons. It was perfect. Everything about drum lessons would fit right into my life. Since I was still watching Skelly after school, well, I had tons of time to practice. Plus, I'd be learning a valuable skill. Plus, Ma wouldn't have to drag Skelly out in public to watch me. Plus, well, playing the drums, that's just plain cool, okay? Well, as soon as I got home that day, I called Ma at the office. I was breathless almost. I was just trying to get it all out. The lessons are on Monday and Thursday afternoons, but they're only for an hour, Ma. So I was thinking that maybe Lana could just stay extra on just those 2 days. Please, Ma, just figure out a way for me to take these lessons, and I'll never ask you for another thing. I swear, I promise, I swear it. So the next morning, my mother offered to pay Lana twice her normal hourly salary for those 2 extra hours a week, if she would please stay. She even offered to send a taxi cab to go pick up Vanna on the days of my drum lessons and bring her over to our house. When Lana said no, Ma offered the job to Etta Gerber, the old lady across the street. When Etta Gerber said she was working full-time now in a tropical fish store, Ma had to put an ad in the paper for a whole new nurse. By the first drum lesson, 6 people had called for interviews. By the second drum lesson, Ma had interviewed 2 of them, both very cranky. By the third drum lesson, she had interviewed the other 4. They were all too expensive. Well, by the 4th drum lesson, I'd already missed 4 drum lessons. Music teacher said it was too late to catch up. My mother promised I could take drum lessons in the summer. But by the summer, I didn't care anymore. It took a year for me to completely accept it. But as hard as she had tried, my mother had not been able to hang on to normal. Even before the start of 7th grade, I had officially stopped thinking of myself as a regular kid and had begun thinking of myself as a kid with obligations at home. The first week of PE, when Coach Rob passed out slips to play on our 7th grade flag football league, I wadded mine up, shot it into the trash can on my way out of the gym. I never gave it another thought after that. I promise, I didn't. But then, on the day of the first practice game, I was walking across the playground on my way home from school, and this friend of mine on the team, he's a kid named Harris Riley, he was tossing around a football. He yelled at me to go out for a pass. And so just for the heck of it, I did. I caught the ball and I threw it back. Harris backed up. "Go long!" he shouted. So I turned around and I just started to run downfield. The ball sailed up into the air, up and out, over my head. I ran faster and faster. I was going as fast as I could go. At the very last minute, I reached my arms and stretched my fingers to their limit. The next thing I knew, I was traveling sideways through the air, flying almost. Then, smack! Just as I caught the ball, I hit the ground belly first. I started rolling around and laughing so hard I just couldn't stop it. I mean, it just felt so good, running and laughing and diving into the grass like that. More than anything, I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay and just watch the game. I looked at my watch. I was already late. Lana would be mad. Took off running for home. In fact, I was almost out of the school gate when this totally unexpected thought came breezing through my brain. So what? I stopped cold. No, really. So what if Lana was mad? Was the world going to come to an end? Would the earth explode if Lana didn't pick Vanna up at exactly 2:45? I'm telling you, the idea was so freeing I can't even describe it. Well, I turned around, I walked back to the sidelines, and I sat down. 20 minutes later, I was still sitting there when Ma's car pulled into the parking lot. And when she got out, she started walking that heavy-footed kind of a walk that mothers do when they're so out of control they don't even care who knows it. Skelly was a few feet behind her. Now, I'm sure she had probably told him to stay in the car, but he'd already forgotten. Even from the football field, I could see that he had dressed himself again. He was wearing pajama bottoms with suspenders, plus a wool scarf. I jumped up and I started running towards them. I prayed. I really did pray as I ran. Please, Ma. Oh, God, please, don't let her start shouting. Not in front of all of these kids. I was almost there when the explosion came. Where in God's name have you been? Her voice was loud and screechy. It carried in the wind. I could feel the eyes of the entire football team staring at my back. Panicking, I just brought my finger up to my lips and I made the shh sound. Big mistake. My mother's voice went up an entire octave. Oh, no, you don't! Do not try to shush me, mister. Do you have any idea the trouble you've caused? Do you? She lunged for my arm, and she started marching me to the car. And then when she saw Skelly, she grabbed him too. And the three of us paraded across the grass like jolly members of the, hey, look at us, we're insane family. We drove home in silence. When we were almost there, Skelly looked over the seat at me, and he waved his fingers. I just glared at him in his stupid striped pajamas with his idiotic brain disease. I hated him.